Hi, good morning, ELAC students. My name is Brian Barrick from the ELAC Completion Center. Here at the Completion Center, we're all about helping you connect to your goals. And of course, many students, one of their goals is transfer. And so today I'm joined by a very special guest who's going to be talking a lot about transfer, my colleague Kirby Dominguez. And Kirby is our director of our ELAC Transfer Center. There's probably nobody at ELAC who's more knowledgeable about the transfer process than Kirby. Kirby, really glad to have you here today. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for the introduction. Yeah, those are big shoes I got to fill now.
I know you're up to filling those shoes. Anytime I have questions about transfer, you're one of the first people that I go to, and you're so knowledgeable about the process. So we're grateful that you're here today. It's transfer season right now. A lot of students are in the process of applying for transfer, and I want to kind of start with kind of the big picture. And that question is, if you're an ELAC student, why should you even be thinking about transfer in the first place?
Uh, Great question, great start. I hope I do it justice, but it really starts at the basis of why you're here. So for a lot of our students, I want to say over 70% of them have selected that they want to transfer as their goal, their primary goal. So I know sometimes when you start, you have this excitement, and then along the way, you might lose that urgency. Here's a reminder to say that you're capable of going anywhere you want to go. We have a saying like you start at ELAC, go anywhere. And I also am a believer that education is a ladder, and we are a primary vehicle to set your foundation for the next steps, which would be at a university of your choosing, whether it's a Cal State, UC, private, out of state. Um, so if you're trying to go into a field of engineering, medical, even something that is within the social sciences, oftentimes the main route to get employed, to really get into that next phase of your life where you're contributing not just for yourself but to your family, I would say transferring would be that key, that route. So
So it sounds like you really see transfer as kind of a tool for upward economic mobility, access to different types of careers, really kind of expanding resources and opportunities. I know that that was the case for me. A good college education kind of opened up a lot of doors.
yeah, it's access to different avenues that you wouldn't be exposed to otherwise, even within your local neighborhood. Um, and it's really a practice run to how you're going to be in your professional world, right? So you're engaging with professors, engaging with your colleagues, your students, and really leveraging your experience, who you are to get into, again, whatever you want to get into. I know when I speak with students, oftentimes their main motivation is, I want to get back to my family. So I see no better way to get to that goal and achieve that goal than to transfer and achieve, that primary goal of transferring out and obtaining your bachelor's.
Absolutely. I know that, like I said at the top, we are now in transfer season, what we on the campus refer to as transfer season. Could you tell our students a little bit about what that means and kind of just go through some of the important dates and maybe even some of the steps that they should know about? Right now, we're recording this at the end of October of 2021. What's coming next?
Something major is called the application deadline. So deadlines have like a negative connotation, but I just really want to encourage students that I know you're busy. You're probably worried about midterms, maybe even the holidays or what to get your family for Christmas. But I would say a way to reward your journey is make sure you apply. So the main two routes, at least within the public higher ed system of California, are the Cal States and the UCs. So there's 23 Cal States and 9 public UC campuses, so University of California, and the primary deadline for the application is November 30th. So I know that could be like a big heavy load to think of, like, oh my God, I have to apply. Just trust me when I say the application is the easiest thing you could do. Um, the Of all the applications, I would say the UC application super intuitive, easy to follow. It kind of holds your hand as you're doing it. But the main thing I want to stress is that the transfer center is here to guide you through each and every step. You could literally do each application within 20, 30 minutes of your time. So it doesn't take too long. You probably watch YouTube videos that are longer than that. And that's just one of the primary steps to transferring out. After you submitted your applications, there are several milestones that follow through. And around December, January, what the Transfer Center does, we obtain a list from both the Cal State and UC system where we provide follow up support so you don't get lost. because again, it could be intimidating. For some of our students, I think there's this narrative of like, I'm not good enough, or, oh, you see, this is why I'm not transferring, when in fact, you guys are more than capable of achieving any goal you want to do, especially when it comes to transferring. Some of our students have like this broad humility and like, oh, I guess I'm not good enough, when in fact, like they're prime to apply to very selective universities. A case in point, 2 weeks ago, there was a student that we had like it had a 3.4, and their first words out of their mouth was, "I'm not UC capable. I'm not
Hmm.
UC material." I don't know where that narrative comes from. I don't know if this is something that was probably pushed upon them in high school or maybe their family. I'm just here to say that you have every right to apply. And then once you get that admit letter, you're choosing where to go. But again, it all starts at the basis of the application. So that one step, that's 30 minutes of your time. I know it's intimidating, but once you submit it, you can breathe a sigh of relief and then you get used to it. Which will be kind of like the norm when you graduate and you're applying to jobs, right? You got to submit the application, resume, cover letter. So it's just part of the process.
Now, you mentioned something really interesting. I want to get back into what you're talking about in terms of students' perceptions about where they can transfer to and how competitive they might be. But, you mentioned that it's really easy to do the transfer application process. I want to emphasize that for students. But I know for UCs, they have the personal insight questions, right? These are like short essays where students are talking a little bit about themselves. So what I don't want students to take away is don't wait until like that last day. You would suggest that students probably get an early start on this, right? And get help with, if they're applying to UC especially, they might have some essay components that they want to get an early start on. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I think you just said something really important. I really want to demystify and kind of break down the UC application.
Okay.
For many of our students, that could be super intimidating. Like, oh my gosh, I have to write 5 essays. These essays are about 350 words each. Honestly, you guys probably text more than that, or do a longer Twitter reply. So these are 5 essays where you're describing who you are and you're telling the advisor, this is why you should select me. I said it earlier. I think a lot of our students have this super broad humility, and they cannot speak about themselves. So they
Yes.
dread speaking about themselves, right? But ask them to speak about their mom, their dad, or their brother. They'll talk from here to the moon. So I just want to say you need to start practicing how to kind of self promote yourself, because guess what? You're going to be doing that when you're applying, for jobs.
That's
So getting
true.
this practice of acknowledging who you are, acknowledging that, yeah, I may be first gen. Sure, maybe I didn't do a lot, but I'm also the oldest brother, oldest sister, so I've taken care of my brothers. I'm also a primary caretaker. These are facets that you could leverage in terms of leadership, in terms of like your ability to manage crisis. Uh, so if you don't know how to get started, the transfer center is here to guide you through it. We call it the personal insight question guide, or PIQ guide. We like to use acronyms, I guess, in our world. That breaks down each of the 7 essays. So there's 7 essays or questions you could choose from, but you're only submitting 5. Actually, sorry, 4. You're submitting 4. Um, Again, not a lot. And one thing I want to stress is that they're asking to know who you are. That will only add to your transfer profile. It won't take away. And what I mean by that is, as long as you write something, it'll give the advisor a sense of who you are. But what really is important is your academic performance and everything else. The PIQ will not deny you. So I want to really take that off the table. As far as the Cal State application, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a transcript entry, where you attended, and that's pretty much it. So there's not much in terms of like the barrier for the Cal State's lower. Sure, the Cal State's asking you to talk about yourself, but remember, this is something that you want to get used to, because you need to get used to self promoting, because who else is going to root for you better than you? So it's okay to gloat and acknowledge all your successes.
A lot of first generation college students have a hard time talking about themselves in that kind of a way, or promoting themselves. I think part of that is, it's almost seen as a virtue to be humble, right? So we don't want to
Mm.
brag too much. We're kind of taught that as a norm. Um, but I think oftentimes too, people just don't know. Their life seems like it's totally normal to them, nothing extraordinary about them. This is where sitting down with somebody like a transfer mentor or one of the transfer counselors, I think, can be so valuable, is to help you identify those pieces of your personal story that would be really important to highlight in your application. So the folks at the transfer center, I think, are really good at helping students make those connections. I want to ask you about something that you said earlier, which was this idea that students might go to transfer and they really sell themselves short. They think that they're not going to be competitive for, you know, highly competitive university, or they might decide that they're going to leave some options off the table just because maybe they don't feel ready, or they don't feel like the college would want to accept them, or maybe it's for some other reason. Do you want to speak to that a little bit in terms of when our students from ELAC actually transfer, when they actually apply, what happens? How selective are our ELAC students, and what should students be thinking about in terms of highly selective universities?
Let me start, I guess, with the timeline, right? So, if we're thinking about the Cal State UC system, you usually apply a year in advance. So you're applying this fall to start potentially next fall. And as I mentioned, there's a few milestones. So let's say you submitted the application on November 30th. The next requirement will be January. You're updating what you took for fall of 2021 and updating the information for spring of 2022. And then along the way, they'll ask for transcripts, maybe additional information. The big months that everyone should keep in mind would be around March through May. This is when you receive your award letter. This is your kind of key to knowing where you want to go. This is when the notices go out of admissions, along with the profile of how much it's going to cost you. So I think for our students, sometimes cost is a kind of a negative. Just want to remind students that 70% or over 70% of our students qualify for some form of complete tuition payment for the Cal States and UCs. For the UC system, and you may want to Google this, it's called the Blue and Gold Opportunity. So if your family makes less than $80,000 per year, you qualify for a coverage of your tuition at the UC system. So taking costs off the table, really what's preventing you from going to any selective university? In terms of selectivity that Brian mentioned, I think you never want to sell yourself short, and you always want to aim high. So in terms of the transfer culture, there's a few things you always want to consider. You want to apply to highly selective universities. The more selective they are, the more funds that they have. So an example would be USC. USC is a needs blind campus. So what that means, to kind of break down what needs based is, when you apply and it turns out that you have a high financial need, your tuition's completely free. So I know that there's sticker shock with USC, like, oh my gosh, it's X amount of dollars per year, when in fact it's free. And some students, some of our recent students, have money in their pocket after the fact. What I mean is every year they're getting paid to go to school. But again, you won't know unless you apply. So the more selective you apply, the more chances that there's even more money for you. So you always want to apply for like your reach campus, your highly selective universities. You also want to apply to match campuses where you have the major and like the GPA requirements. And then you want to apply for your safety. Sometimes people call it a backup campus. I don't like using backup. I prefer safety. So you're spreading your net wide. So again, you're applying to a multitude of campuses so that you're ensuring that your options are broad and, up to you to decide. The biggest factor in terms of deciding where to go is once you have all the evidence before you, the cost, why you applied there, how does it align with your major, how does it align with your career goals, and then really remind yourself, why did you apply there? And then you factor in your other costs, right? Like, okay, do I work full time? Do I live at home? Do I have other obligations? So it's okay that maybe you got admitted to UCI, but then you're like, I think Long Beach works out better because the drive is, closer. So factors that are very personal. I in no way ever want to tell a student this is where you want to go, but I will encourage you to apply broadly. And then once we're in that April-May phase, really sit down, count the costs, pros and cons, and then you know why you attended where you attended. And there should be no question. I never want any of you to settle on where to attend. I really want you to know this is my primary reason why I'm attending here, and have a solid answer as to why. Um,
I think it's really wise that students do think about the cost of attending school. One of the things that you shared just now that was really important to me was you said that 75% of ELAC students who apply to UC or CSU, they get their fees paid for through financial aid. That's just amazing. That's the majority of all of the students transferring from ELAC have sounds like pretty robust financial aid packages, regardless of whether it's a UC, CSU, and in some cases like the private universities like USC that you just mentioned that might give a full ride as well. So obviously important when you're making that decision where you're going to go to factor in the financial aspect of transferring, but just knowing that those financial aid resources are there, that's really key information. So I hope students, I hope you're paying attention to that. I hope you heard what Mr. Dominguez said about that. So the affordability piece really important. You had mentioned in terms of the admit rate, students casting a wide net, trying to get into a number of different universities, so they have those choices available. Um, I want to kind of just pick your brain here for a few minutes too about the ELAC Transfer Center itself. A lot of students watching this, they might not have ever stepped foot in the transfer center. Of course, we've been, working from home for a couple of years. It's all been remote and digital. And I know here in our building, we just got back, so transfer center is open. You want to talk a little bit about the transfer center services and why students should consider getting in touch with the transfer center?
Yeah, let me start with I guess our workshop series. I think for the fall term, we have about 34 workshops that started back in early September. And they're themed either on specific applications like the Cal State UC application or the Common App. The Common application is what's used for all private universities within the US. We also have personal 30-minute appointments with our transfer mentors to work on either your application, personal narrative, PIQs. So we have that kind of support, whether that is online or in person. From 12 to 5, Monday through Thursday, we have a live Cranium Cafe lobby where if you have quick questions, maybe you're stuck, you're about to submit, you need someone to review the application last minute, we're there. Again, we're there digitally online. And then we also have transfer counselors. So some of our students have, I would say, complex scenarios because maybe they're called reverse transfer students. So these are students that may have attended, say, San Marcos, Cal State San Marcos, and for whatever reason they came back to ELAC. So now they accrued university level units. So sometimes we need some sort of specialization in understanding, what will transfer, what doesn't. So if you find yourself in a really complex scenario, more than welcome to meet with a counselor here. And we do ed plans incorporating what's needed for winter and spring, because oftentimes these applications will ask every student, what will you take? And if they don't respond properly as to what they will take, it's important to have an ed plan on file, because then a student can reference that, okay, this is what I'm going to input, so that it matches and aligns. So we have that. And then upcoming would be our transfer application kind of rush. So the last week in November, we're probably running like an all-day Zoom party. So in person, what we would do, we would run like the lab. I'm looking out in the lobby right now. We probably had like 80 to 90 students here at any given time the last week of the application. We can't do that right now because of COVID, but what we can do is run a live Zoom where we have a platform where you can kind of share space with other students. And what we normally do is once you hit submit, we kind of celebrate you. I know it's not the same as done in person, but it's at least a space where you get affirmation that, like, hey, cool, you did one of the steps. So that would be the brunt of fall. For spring, we will offer follow-up. So each of the 1,800 to 2,000 students that will be transferring out and applying to transfer are assigned to a transfer mentor. The transfer mentor will reach out to you, email you if you have any questions, just because we want to make sure that no one falls through the cracks, and that we do our part as a campus to make sure you guys get through the pipeline. And then I also want to open it up and say, sometimes life does happen, and you have an agency to decide whether you move forward or not. So I know we've had students that get admitted to all the campuses they apply to, but maybe their parent got, they were fired, maybe there was health reasons, and they have to decide to wait another year or maybe another term for spring, and that's fine too. So I don't want people to feel forced to do anything against their will, but I do want to remind you why you're here. I'm definitely somebody that doesn't like wasting time. I don't want to waste your time in terms of students. So we want to make sure we use every moment we can to get you to your goal.
When you described those services to me, the word that came to mind was demystifying. I really see you and all the counselors in the Transfer Center, your team of staff and coaches, as really helping students as guides through what can be a very confusing, complicated process. So, students, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about transfer, I cannot recommend the Transfer Center more highly to you. They just have really incredible folks working in their department. They're very knowledgeable, and if you need that guidance, a lot of times you've never been through that process before. It's a little bit hard to figure out the ins and outs. This is your department, so I really want to encourage you to connect with the Transfer Center. So Kirby, thank you so much for your time. I know we're kind of here nearing the end of our time. I just want to see if you had any final thoughts, anything else that you might want to share with the students before we wrap up today.
Yeah, a few things. So I think one thing I forgot to emphasize would be our admit rate. So let me break down what the term admit rate means. So for students that apply to a university system, the admit rate means is defined as you were literally admitted to the campus, right? So um, for the UC system, we are at about a 75% admit rate. So out of all students that applied, out of all ELAC students that applied to the UC system, 75% of them got accepted to the UCs. What does that mean for you? You have a 75% chance. That's huge. That's better than the lotto, much better than the lotto. Now, for the CalC system, we have about a 91% admit rate, which is extremely high. But what do these numbers mean? These numbers need context. So the admit rate for UCs, we're at 75%. That's equivalent to SMC's admit rate. So we have a lot of students that will literally take the bus 2 hours to go to SMC because they hear that it's number one to the UC, when in fact they could just come here. The other thing I want to stress is that there's this imposter syndrome that takes place before the application and then after. Imposter syndrome means that you feel that you're not worthy of being in that space for whatever reason. I want to encourage you to know that when you get admitted, accepted, and you follow through and you step foot on the campus, hopefully in the fall of 22, things should be normal and everyone should be in person. Just know that you're in your spot there. No one gave it to you. You earned it. No one's going to take it away. And in the end, you chose to go there. So there's a power in you choosing. Analogy I use is like you gave them the rose, right? So just remember that there's a power in choosing where you want to go, and you've earned your right. You've earned that seat. Don't feel lesser than. The last thing I want to leave you all with is that there's broad studies of looking at transfer students and their competitiveness versus native students. Native students would be those students that started as freshmen at a university. So when they compare the grade, graduation rates, and all of that, transfer students perform better than native students. Why? Because you guys are hustlers. So I just want to encourage you all to, yes, you got to apply. Yes, it's something else you're adding to your list of to-dos for fall, but it's worth it. It's for you. I think education is a selfish endeavor sometimes, and it feels wrong, but this is the only time to do it. And I promise you that the rewards afterwards will really pay off for you and your family, and for many of you, the generations that follow you. So I'm a product of the community college system. I benefited from being around people that really believed in me. So I just want to pass that kind of energy to all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Kirby, for being here today. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for your words of insight and encouragement for our students. Students, if you have questions about any of this stuff, of course, the Transfer Center is a great resource for you too. You can also get in touch with the Completion Center. Again, we want to connect you to your goals and help you succeed and thrive throughout your educational journey. Kirby, thanks so much, and to everybody
Thanks, man.
watching, thanks for being here with us today.